Good evening, welcome to the show. Steve Price in for Andrew again tonight. Let's get into it. Here's what's coming up on the program tonight. A war of words has broken out between the Dutton opposition and the federal government over our seeming inability to make a decision on whether to provide an Australian Royal Navy ship asked for by the Americans to help protect merchant ships from pirates. Senator Matt Canavan will join us shortly with a view on that. Politicians have descended on the flood-weary communities of Cairns today, promising a quick response, then admitting it might actually take months to fix the water-damaged infrastructure. Things like roads. We'll take you to Cairns as well tonight and to Port Douglas. And while in Victoria, it is the 000 emergency hotline that's in hot water. They are subject to a whistleblower who's leaked pictures from a call centre that shows that people are sitting there waiting online for a 000 call to be answered. Opposition health spokeswoman Georgie Crozier will join us, and that is just completely unacceptable. Now, first up, before we get to Senator Canavan, and as the political year winds up at the end of the week, probably until, I guess, mid to late January, it's not a bad time, I don't think, to make a prediction about some of the things that are going to go on in 2024. Now, I predict one of the biggest and most divisive issues next year, and I'm sure Matt will have a view on this, is going to be the impact of green energy projects, wind, solar and transmission lines that they are going to have on regional Australia. Now, the battle over food-producing real estate and the largely foreign-backed green energy projects is going to get very ugly, I tip. It is, in fact, very ugly already in many parts of regional Australia. It is just that for city folk, it's out of sight and out of mind. Now, trust me, it is going to be a major issue next year as the Labor governments right around Australia, state and federal, push desperately to meet those impossible-to-meet emissions targets as the climate change clock keeps ticking. Now, take a New Deal in New South Wales. I was shocked when I read this morning. It's reported in the Australian newspaper. Now, I might have been asleep at the wheel, but I had never heard of the Central West Arana Zone project. Now, apparently it was legislated way back in 2018. It's in the news today because a contract has been signed with a Spanish, French and Australian consortium to develop this Arana project. But it is the sheer scale of what is intended here that will divide communities surrounding Dubbo, in fact, divide communities right around the country, including the Central West. This wind and solar zone has a footprint of 20,000 square kilometres. 20,000, let me repeat that, 20,000 square kilometres, not metres, kilometres. Now, as I said, Dubbo is at its centre. It takes in Mudgee to the east, Narromine is on the edge going west, and Gilgandra to the north. So what is this thing exactly? Well, on its website, it's described as a hub of renewable energy projects, including solar farms, wind farms, that means massive turbines, and batteries. And then the kicker, this green energy will need, yep, you guessed it, hundreds of kilometres of transmission lines stretching as far as the eye can see. The zone scoops in 14 towns and villages across some of Australia's best farming land, and they brag it will eventually be able to power 1.4 million homes. Gee, wow, great. That's the numbers as of today. And the main contractors, Acciona from Spain and Cobra from France. So, foreign companies installing foreign-made panels and foreign-made wind turbines on prime Australian agricultural land. So why don't we know more about this huge project? I just don't understand that. Well, as the ABC reported last month, residents, meaning the farmers in this zone, who sign up to host transmission lines or cover paddocks with solar panels or stick a wind turbine in the middle of a paddock, have been forced to sign confidentiality clauses. Yep, secret deals. Now, the CEO of an outfit called Squadron Energy was quoted by the ABC defending these secret provisions. Jason Willoughby said they were a safeguard for all involved, and then this spin. He said, quote, because these voluntary agreements include personal and commercially sensitive information for both parties, confidentiality clauses are included. Now, one local in that report said this was splitting the community apart. And you'd have to agree. How would you feel if your Central West rural property had a magnificent view and the neighbour over the road strikes a secret deal to whack up a giant wind turbine right in your line of sight? One family was offered, can you believe this, a measly $5,000 in compensation. That was later increased to $10,000 for them to, say, OK, we don't mind if the neighbouring farm sign one of these things to deal to whack it up in front of it, but if you pay us the money, no problem. The other problem city folk don't hear about, this family's insurance bill, and this is at the nub of this, the insurance bill for that property doubled year on year, and they claim this is because insurers are not comfortable with all the engineered green machinery being plonked next to agriculture. Now, trust me, this is going to be a huge issue. Already farmers in Victoria are refusing to host transmission lines in the Western Districts, and it will be happening Australia-wide. This will be the battle of 2024. So to far north Queensland now, where many roads are still blocked in from landslides. Some of the pictures coming out of there are extraordinary. Air and sea's the only way to get into Port Douglas from Cairns. Many of us have driven that highway. Pictures taken by Sky today show the road has been hit by landslides and boulders. Homes have been washed away, while 35 areas still remain isolated. Now, authorities are working to evacuate people who are cut off by floodwaters. Let's bring in Sky News weather presenter Rhianna Elston. She has been up in that region today. Rhianna, some of the pictures you've shown us today are incredible, and some of the people up there that we've seen on Sky today, they say they feel like they've been abandoned.
Yeah, they certainly do. I'm here in the small community of Mossman, where we're starting to get a picture of the true extent of the damage here. Now, residents have described what happened here on Sunday as like a wall of water that first rushed through the main street, where it inundated many businesses that now have to be closed just days before Christmas. And then the water came through here, this residential area. Now, this is one of the hardest hit streets. And just have a look what you'd see on the verge there. People's entire lives have been brought outside on the street. We've got white goods, children's toys, Christmas trees, furniture, people's beds. Some people in this community, they really have lost everything. Now, what we've been told is that there really wasn't much notice before the flood hit. Some people who've lived here for decades say they've never seen anything like this before, a flood event on this scale. And as you said, some people do feel abandoned by the authorities.
Half the businesses have already closed. The Mossman Mill, this is enough just to devastate it, and probably Mossman will never recover.
That's what police are supposed to do, give us some hope. So I say to Albo, I say to the new Premier, come up here, meet the people in Mossman.
And we got severe flooding down there, and it was coming up at the back of the house and the front of the house, in the dark. What can you do? It's quite scary because you can't stop it. It's sort of like a monster.
Now all we've been doing is scraping that mud and cleaning. On our hands and knees scrubbing the floors, trying to get all the mud out now.
Rhiannon, Mossman's north of Port Douglas. How did you actually get up there?
Yeah, we came up here by helicopter because the main highway between Cairns and Port Douglas is completely cut off. It's likely to be closed for weeks. And what we saw as we made that journey is really the extent of the damage to that highway. It was significant, ripped apart in multiple areas, landslides across it, and the road just swept away. So that is going to be a huge undertaking. That road is a vital lifeline to these communities here in far north Queensland. It's the way in and out, bringing essential supplies such as food and water. So communities right across the far north, we're talking some 40,000 people now running low on those critical supplies. So it really is an unfolding crisis situation. Now, there is a back road that has reopened today. People are able to get in and out by boat, but that highway is really a crucial piece of getting these communities back on their feet.
Yeah, especially, Rhiannon, when you consider as a tourist, and I've been to Port Douglas a couple of times. You leave the Cairns airport and you drive to Port Douglas on that James Cook Highway. You can go up through the Atherton Tableland and back down through Mareeba, but that's a several-hour detour, and tourists are probably going to be unwilling to do that. But that might be the only way they're going to get food and supplies into that spot.
Yeah, it could be. And what we're hearing is that backway did reopen today, but it sounds like it's still pretty ropey. There were landslides across that road as well. It goes up into the hills. It's not really very suitable for trucks and major supplies to get through. So what we're still seeing are those supplies being dropped in by people like the Army to some of those harder hit communities.
And just finally, there were politicians there today. We saw Murray Watt. We saw, I think the Prime Minister himself might be coming to Mossman tomorrow. And you had the new Queensland Premier, Stephen Miles, there as well. Do you get the general feeling from the locals you spoke to that they want to see political leaders there because they feel that showing what you've seen is going to maybe quicken up some of the relief that's going to come flowing out of Canberra and Brisbane?
Yeah, people in this community definitely want to see the leaders visiting so they can tell them what has happened here and the scale of the damage and what lies next for them, which is weeks, if not months, of cleanup and a huge bill to pay.
Great to speak to you. Good luck getting up there, and thank you. And we'll see you again tomorrow with the latest. That's Rhiannon Elston there up in far north Queensland. There's a breaking news story as we go to air tonight. New Northern Territory Chief Minister has been announced. Matt Cunningham, who's been doing outstanding reporting from Darwin for years now, has been kind enough to join us. This has come quickly. I saw you earlier today, Matt. You said, it's probably going to happen between now and the end of the week. But who is it?
Well, it's the Treasurer and the Education Minister, Eva Lawler, who has announced that she has the numbers and she will be the Northern Territory's next Chief Minister. Eva Lawler, this is a story that started emerging last night, Steve, that Eva Lawler was starting to do the numbers and secure the numbers to be the next Northern Territory Chief Minister in a deal that she'd struck with the left faction's Chancey Paik. Now, when we first reported the possibility of this morning, my phone started to melt down, and it's melting down again now. There are plenty within the Labor Party and within industry up here in the Northern Territory who are somewhat alarmed about the new leadership team here in the Northern Territory. There had been others pushing for Nicole Mannison, the current deputy. She's just issued a statement saying that she's going to the backbench. I'd expect she won't contest the next election. It's all a bit of a mess up here in the Northern Territory, Steve. It follows the departure of the former Chief Minister, Natasha Files. She resigned yesterday after it was revealed that she held shares in the mining company South 32, which runs the Gemco manganese mine on Groot Island, shares that she had failed to declare. But Eva Lawler has the numbers and she will be the Northern Territory's next Chief Minister.
Just briefly, Matt, how's that line up with the factions? I know one of my old footy heroes, Joel Bowden from the left, was thinking about putting his hand up, didn't have the numbers.
Not quite. It was interesting the way things played out today because, as I said, we reported this morning that Eva Lawler was on this ticket with Chancey Paik, who's from the left faction. Joel Bowden, most people in Victoria at least will know, someone who played 260-odd games with the Richmond Football Club. He is a key member of the left. The left union swung in behind Joel Bowden today. They were trying to get him over the line. They were trying to get the left to lock in behind him. But that hasn't eventuated, and Eva Lawler has come away with the numbers. She will be the next Chief Minister. It's interesting, there's one report in the NT News that said that one of Eva Lawler's motivations for going for the top job was to keep Joel Bowden out of it. She doesn't like Joel Bowden. I think that would not be news to anyone up here in me reporting that. So it'll be interesting to see how those two are going to get along in the future. Joel Bowden is in the Cabinet. He's the Infrastructure Minister at the moment, but there obviously will need to be a new cabinet announced with both Natasha Files, the outgoing Chief Minister, and Nicole Mannison, her deputy, both stepping back to the backbench. So pretty chaotic few days here in Darwin. Labor and Eva Lawler certainly got their work cut out in front of them just 8 months out from the next Northern Territory election.
Good on you, Matt. Thank you very much for bringing us that breaking news and great reporting on that story right through the week. Now, coming up, disgruntled emergency call takers in Victoria blowing the whistle on wait times and staffing levels at Triple O. You won't believe how long the wait times are. That's up next. Welcome back on this Wednesday night. Steve Price in for Andrew Bolt. Now, the Melbourne Herald Sun newspaper today broke a story from leaked documents exposing what you could describe as potentially deadly Triple O delays on calls for emergencies in Victoria. Now, the reports have exposed a wait time of more than 1 minute for emergency calls to be answered for police, for fire, ambulance services. Anyone who's used Triple O will know what sort of state of mind you're in when you call that number. Let's bring in the Victorian Liberal MP and Shadow Health Minister, Georgie Crozier. The government tried to pour cold water on this morning. Georgie, welcome to you, and said, "I know," and the Triple O operators themselves were wheeled out and said, "Well, it's not right, it's wrong." Where's the truth here?
Well, Steve, I'd be believing the whistleblowers, those people that are working in the system who've taken that screenshot to show the true issues that are arising. And they are saying that 11 people waited over a minute for their calls to be answered. So that's Victorians dialling 000 in an emergency, but waiting over over a minute, I should say. Now, there are 3 centres here in Victoria where those calls are taken. And to say that there's nothing wrong here by government and other, patsies to do the government's bidding is simply not the case when you've got whistleblowers saying this is happening on a regular basis. So this is a real concern for any Victorian who is dialing 000 in times of emergency. As you know, every second counts in an emergency, and to wait over a minute is a very alarming figure.
Your memory, Georgie, is better than mine, but I've got a memory of, was it during the last state election campaign that there was quite an argument over staffing of this particular service, and the government at the time promised, or indeed did, increase the number of staff in that call centre?
Well, that's right, Steve. So, of course, we've had dozens of Victorians that have been linked to the failures within 000 and failures for an ambulance to arrive. We know that at least 33 Victorians died in recent years, and this is after warnings way back in 2016 that more needed to be done with the 000 system. So this has been going on for years and years and years, and there were promises that more staff had come in. But the government is saying, yes, well, we've put more staff in, but they're not telling you, well, how many have left? How many have left the system? And when you've got these figures on a board where you've got 11 Victorians waiting for over a minute before their emergency calls are being answered, how many other Victorians have given up? How many other Victorians are hanging up because they can't get through? And that is the real concern here, when these emergency situations are not being responded to in a timely fashion. That is putting lives at risk. Every second counts in an emergency. And yes, clearly there more needs to be done to be able to adequately provide the services that police, ambulance and fire services require to get to the community and address their needs.
And as you say, if the operators were happily employed, they wouldn't be taking photographs and leaking them to the media. Here's the Health Minister, Mary Thomas, today. Here's what she had to say about this.
It has met all of its performance targets in relation to ambulance calls since August 2022, after our government made a significant investment and commitment to continue to strengthen and reform 000.
I note she only says ambulance there. What about police and fire?
That's right. You know, we've got fire services, police services and ambulance services. And this is the problem. These issues that are arising.
She must think we're fools. She must think we're fools.
Well, I think Victorians understand exactly what's going on here, Steve. And it's the minister who's foolish in this, because there it is on that board. 11 Victorians could not get through, had to wait for over a minute. to get their emergency calls answered. That's telling you that something is seriously wrong. And I know that they will try and spin this and cover up and throw out statistics, but that is there on the board, taken by one of those operators within the system who is saying, we've got a problem here. And that is 11 Victorians who are needing those emergency services who are not being serviced. And I think it's doing a great disservice to the broader Victorian community at a time when we need to have all of our systems working and have these issues resolved after so much very, very significant issues within the system where dozens of Victorians died because they couldn't get through to 000 or couldn't get an ambulance.
It seems to me the Victorian government's at war with a lot of the frontline workers, and I think that comes back to the fact the state's broke. They can't afford to give people pay rises. I do know, though, the Victoria Police have paused their industrial action. They're exploring a 9-day fortnight to address burnout and unpaid overtime, Georgie. Now, the last thing we should be doing is not paying police enough, but when you've got a state that's only got a AA credit rating is basically broke, then you can see why the police are not getting the pay rises that they need. This seems to me to be a bit like a stalling tactic.
Steve, you're right. The state is broke, and the priorities of the Allan Labor government, like the Andrews Labor government, are all wrong. They are putting billions of dollars into tunnels, into infrastructure projects, but they're not providing the basic services like supporting our police that are there to keep the community safe. Now, at a time when we're coming into a busy holiday period, we need our police officers to feel supported, and we've got a government who's gone to war with them. You can see what's happening. In October, there was a survey where 25% or 28%, I think, said that they were going to leave the service within 12 months. How is that going to help the community when these police officers are there to keep the community safe? And we've got some real problems in this state with rising crime, home invasions, car thefts, knife crimes on the rise, all of these things that are just horrible. We've got drive-by shootings, tobacco shops being torched every second day, it seems to me. We've got really significant crime occurring, and we've got a police service that is really screaming out for support from a government who's going to war with them. And that is not good enough. And I think you're right. I think this is a complete stalling tactic, but made by the government because they've got no money to negotiate with these frontline workers. And that is a real concern and should be a concern for every single Victorian.
Yeah, 100%, you're quite right. Georgie Crozier, as usual, thank you very much for your time tonight. That is a real problem in Victoria. Now, let's turn our attention to New South Wales. The New South Wales Rural Fire Service. Now, we all have great regard for the RFS. I've talked to the RFS for years about the voluntary work that they do. They do a fantastic job. Now, the RFS calls itself the world's largest volunteer firefighting organisation. Their words, not mine. It says or claims to have 71,000 members. 56,500 of those are considered to be operational or inactive firefighting roles. But a number of RFS volunteers and former firefighters have come out claiming, and this was to Sky, that those figures are grossly inflated. Now, our investigations reporter Jonathan Lee spoke to them. He joins us now. Some of the guys, Jono, that you spoke to, they were very blunt, and they are basically saying that RFS Command are making things up.
Well, good evening, Stephen. Good evening to everyone at home. Our inbox has been alive with people getting in contact with us, saying that the numbers that the RFS claims to have access to simply aren't accurate. You can call them rubbery. You can say that they are fudged. The truth, from what we're being told, is that the number of volunteers which are available to the Rural Fire Service is far, far fewer than what they would have us believe. The RFS numbers, the volunteers, have dropped from 76 to 71,000. We've been told some 56,000 are listed as active, but others have told us they suspect the true number might be somewhere between 15 and 20,000. And we're actually shown an app. One senior officer or a senior volunteer showed us an app, what's called RFS Active. And this app is used to marshal the troops effectively when there is a crisis. He showed us how many people responded to say that they were available, how many declined and said they couldn't. But the great majority, somewhere between 30 and 40, I believe it was, simply didn't even respond. And what that tells us is that there are an enormous number of dormant members who are a party to these brigades who haven't been taken off the books or can't be taken off the books.
In your report this morning, I note that Rob Rogers, you asked him several times, why don't you want an audit? What was his explanation? I mean, if I was the head of a fire service with some full-time paid members and mostly volunteers, I'd like to know exactly how many people I can rely on.
Well, you would like to know, but I suppose in the world of cynicism that we need to operate in at times, you also need to ask what is gained by not knowing. And no one's given me that answer, but if the RFS force isn't as large as what we would be led to believe, why is that? This is an extract from a man we spoke to and also the comments from Commissioner Rogers as well. Have a listen to what we've been told.
For the Commissioner, I would remind of an old adage, and that is the truth will out. And I think it's time he started to look at the true figures of which nobody really knows about except the brigade members who know what's happening around their sheds, because they're going to wake up one day and find that they can't man the trucks. Speaking out like me, I could be disciplined.
In the last decade, how many members of your brigade have never turned up?
3/4.
3/4?
Yeah. Some people I haven't, in 12 years, have never met.
How many of those 70,000 are, trained up to date and active and ready to actually respond this summer?
Well, normally we have, I think the numbers, and I'll get it. I'll give it make sure I give an accurate answer, but it's around 45,000 that are trained, ready to go. Now they're doing the operational firefighting side of it. We run on about 45,000 is the active number, we believe.
That's quite extraordinary, Jono. I mean, I was on air in New South Wales for the Black December fires in 2019, and we all saw the damage on South Coast, North Coast. It was just horrendous. My memory is that the RFS then received a massive funding boost. What's happened to that money?
Well, this is it. We've seen that the money which has gone to the RFS has, I suppose, for a better way of saying it, exploded. It was around $300,000 or $400,000 back before Black Saturday. It's now upward of 300 million, now upward of 800 million. In terms of the money that's been given to the RFS, it is huge. Taxpayers have a right to know exactly how many volunteers it has. And one of the things that's been said to us is that what we're seeing is governments, state governments, amassing, in effect, empires of aircraft, and they're being used to respond to blazes rather than doing the required hazard reduction burns first, which are enormously controversial because the smoke, the toxic smoke, lingers over inner city suburbs. So that's one of the areas which people are speaking to us about. Is there a reluctance to do hazard reduction burns as opposed to what looks great on camera, which is bringing in helicopters and aircraft to fight the cause or the outbreak of the blaze? It's something we need to dig down further into, but it certainly plays well on TV when you see the helicopters responding. But the fireys we keep talking to say they want to do more hazard reduction burns. It's not to say that Rob Rogers doesn't want to do it also, but there seems to be a problem here, something which is preventing them doing it. We might be told it's weather. Others are saying that we have more opportunity with warmer weather during winter to do a greater number of hazard reduction burns. So there's an element of rubberiness here, which it's tremendously hard to get through considering the enormous quantums of money which are going to the RFS.
Jonathan Lee, great work again as usual. Thank you very much for your time tonight. At the beginning of the program, I mentioned an area where Dubbo is in the centre of it. It's called the Central West Arana Zone. Now, it was reported in the Australian newspaper today that that zone is 20,000 square kilometres in size. And the idea here is that foreign construction companies are signing contracts to build green energy projects like wind turbines, solar panels, and of course you're going to have transmission lines right through the middle of all of this. Now, my point at the start of the program is I think in 2024, the battle between farmers in rural Australia and the green energy that the government wants to build and says it has to build to get us to a point where we have negative, the whole global warming argument about net zero is going to cause a split in the communities. Someone who'll know more about this than I do is National Senator Matt Canavan. Thanks for joining us. Had you ever heard of this Central West Arana Zone?
Yes, I had. It's one of a number of different renewable energy zones that's been designated by the New South Wales government. And really, this is just the beginning, Steve. A recent report put out this year by some academics calling themselves the Net Zero Australia Group shows how much of our landscape will be defaced by, as you say, foreign-built solar and wind farms. That 20,000 hectares you mentioned, it's actually going to be a total of well over 100,000 hectares, apparently an area the size of half of Victoria. And this group, this Net Zero Australia Group, they're advocates for net zero. They're not like me who are concerned about it. They want it to happen, and they sort of just mentioned this and produced these maps with vast swathes of our continent absolutely blanketed with wind turbines and solar panels. And you have to wonder whether any of these academics actually descend from their ivory towers and come out and speak to the landowners and farmers and communities that are expected to just have their ambience, their livelihoods destroyed in this futile attempt to change the temperature of the globe.
Yeah, I should correct myself. It's 20,000 square kilometres, the Arana Zone, so it is a huge slice of New South Wales. And we learned today from that story in the Australian, the ABC's also reported on this, that many of the farmers are being, if they sign up for compensation for having a transmission line through their property, or they give over some of their property to put solar panels, they're being paid compensation. But then, Matt, they get asked to sign privacy deals, documents that say they have to keep the amount of money they get secret. And so you've got one neighbour who doesn't want to have a giant bloody, wind turbine next to him, next to a neighbour who does, and the neighbour next door can't tell the bloke next door what he's being paid.
Well, that's right, and that's why the Nationals Party have been calling for a code of conduct here. There should be a code of conduct that governs the behaviour of these renewable energy companies, especially these foreign-owned ones, who, in my experience, give very short shrift to community rights, to landowner rights. The problem, you've always got this problem, Steve, that whoever is considered the angels among us usually are the biggest sinners because they feel like they can get away with things. And these renewable energy companies behave as if they're saving the world. And so why should they have to descend and deal with these sort of difficult town hall meetings and answer questions when you're saving the world? You've got bigger fish to fry. And I just don't see them doing this groundwork, getting people on board. And that's why we need a code of conduct here to govern this behaviour and make sure we get fair outcomes. I agree with you. This issue is going to blow next year. There's going to be a big rally in Parliament House when we come back in February. I know a lot of people here from Central Queensland will be travelling down for that, as will people from all over the country, because the rest of Australia needs to understand what's happening to our environment, what's happening to our landscapes, what's happening to our ability to feed ourselves through the destruction of our land through renewable energy projects.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're absolutely correct. It's going to be a massive political issue next year. Thank you very much for your help, Matt. I'll talk again soon. Matt Canavan there, coming up after the break. The ABC's finally pulls its head out of the sand and sacks one of their radio hosts for anti-Semitic posts online. I'll have those details and more with our panel up next. Welcome back. I'll get to that ABC sacking with my panel in just a moment. Just on media, SBS, the television network, has finally apologised to Warren Mundine, the no campaigner for the referendum, after a heated exchange he had with Marcia Langton in early October. You might remember this, where the host of that discussion, it's hardly a discussion, it was a shouting match, accused Warren Mundine of racism and repeatedly interrupted him. Have a listen to this.
Fixing the problems that we have in Aboriginal
just going to interrupt you there because
I'm not going to sit here and cop lies from people.
Well, we're not going to sit here and take you abusing a national treasure like Marcia Langton, who never said that Australians were racist.
And you must accept.
And her words were twisted. I'm going to stop you there, Warren.
People make the decisions.
I think. Well, we've just seen who Warren Mundine is.
Yes, that's right.
Well, let's bring in our panel now. Joining me, former Speaker of the House, Bronwyn Bishop, and the Australian's media writer, Sophie Ellsworth. Now, Sophie, to top this off, Mundine's microphone, as we understand it, was reportedly cut off by SBS, someone in the control room, as that exchange went on. And we saw Narelda, the host of that debate, basically calling Warren a racist and telling him to shut up so that our national treasure, Marcia Langton, could speak.
Steve, this 7 or 8 minute session, I think it was, is nothing short of utterly disgraceful from a taxpayer-funded broadcaster. I first wrote about these comments the day after the Voice referendum. I was just gobsmacked when I was watching that live. And a couple of things here. SBS has finally apologised to Warren Mundine. Now, they would not release the Ombudsman's report, had to get it through other means, which I think is disgraceful that Australians are not able to access this. Narelda Jacobs has not apologised to Warren Mundine. I've repeatedly asked SBS if she will be. They have not commenting. Whether she's been disciplined or not, I don't know. They won't say that either. There is a protection racket inside SBS for this type of conduct. And to treat Warren Mundine like that, label Marcia Langton a national treasure, is nothing short of disgraceful. And I think the whole situation with this is an embarrassment to the SBS, and they should hang their heads in shame because they are meant to be impartial.
Bronwyn, I mean, you go back to the whole referendum debate and as it played out, and it's things like that from SBS that Australians sat up, took notice and said, well, I'm not going to cop this. I don't wear this idea of voting yes.
Well, Steve, that's right. And what this apology has done is just remind us of how Albanese split the Australian nation, pursuing what he thought would be an easy victory for him, which he thought would be a piece of cake, and tell everybody nothing. And I think we have to remember that. This is a man who I've said again and again, Albanese I mean, who I sat in that chamber with for more than 20 years and nobody ever said was a leader. And this is the man who split the nation. You had 3 people in that studio of Aboriginal heritage who were in disagreement, but it just came out as that awful display of vitriol. And I think that Albanese, in failing in his address of what he's achieved in the last year, failing to mention at all the referendum and what it did to Australia, again reflects on him. So that apology was well and truly deserved for Warren, who fought a splendid campaign, and he put up with some dreadful attacks. But he's a strong man, he believed in what he was saying. And he and the new thinking that Senator Price is bringing about, that is that victimhood is not the way forward. It is to find out where the need is and to address it. And to be all proud Australians, I think, is the real outcome of that referendum.
Yeah, as Jacinta told us this week, I mean, she hasn't heard a word from Anthony Albanese since, and the problems of Alice Springs still exist. ABC heads continued to roll. Sophie, the radio host Antoinette Lattouf was sacked this afternoon, as she should have been, for her anti-Israel social media posts. Here's one of those posts. Have a listen.
Israelis get killed, Palestinians just die. Language matters. Israelis are always killed. You can also use the word slaughtered, barbaric attacks, victims of terrorism when describing their tragic deaths. But for Palestinians, given the body count exceeds 10,000, best to keep it ambiguous. Like, all these Palestinians have died. We don't know how. Maybe they spontaneously combusted. Maybe it had something to do with a dodgy air fryer or a Tesla.
How the hell did she ever think she was going to keep a job at the ABC by doing that?
Well, Steve, I broke this story this afternoon after putting inquiries into the ABC. Chair Ita Buttrose, Managing Director David Anderson received numerous complaints about what Antoinette was posting on social media. Now, this is a monumental failure of epic proportions by ABC management, who put Antoinette in that role as a fill-in radio broadcaster, Steve. Now, she's prolific on social media. She doesn't shy away from her pro-Palestinian views. This is not a secret. ABC management put her there. They knew exactly what she was doing, and I know on very good authority that Chair Ita Buttrose is absolutely furious about this. Management are in damage control. They're scrambling tonight. They don't have a host to replace Antoinette tomorrow at this point. When I last made inquiries about an hour ago, it is an absolute shambles. And Steve, I will say this, it always falls one way with the ABC. You never see hosts getting scolded for pro-Israel tweets or pro-Israel posts or pro-voice, the no side. It's always the same view, the leftist view of the ABC. This is rife through the public broadcaster. This has embarrassed the whole radio arm. And Steve, this is just an absolute disgrace that these sort of people are getting plum roles on the ABC. Management are putting them there.
Bronwyn, you and I have been around long enough to know when the ABC was classy, it was independent, it was balanced, and you could turn it on and you could rely for it. You know, the 7:45 news was always there, independent, accurately reporting. How's it gone so bad so quickly? I mean, it's just disgraceful these days.
Well, the rot really began in the 70s and it slowly got worse and worse. And you always had a socialist cell in there. You had people who were very much identified along the way with the far left of politics. And unfortunately, there's no discipline from the top. It seems to be run by a collective. And my solution has been, or recommendation has been, that the charter that is contained in the legislation that established the commission or the corporation should be enforceable, because in the legislation it specifically states that it is not enforceable. You can't bring an action against the ABC for breach of its charter. Now, if you made the charter enforceable, then you would start to get accountability. It can't be beyond the wit of man to do that. So I think it's about time that happened. And then I think in the future there has to be a look at whether or not the ABC should become a subscription service. The BBC is looking at that. It may well be looked at here. But I think the way that the ABC is now going, where someone deliberately put that woman in that position, deliberately, knowing that others had been cast aside from their hosting roles because of their attitudes. And to be impartial means precisely that. To uphold standards means precisely that. So let's make the charter enforceable.
But Steve,
you must have had a little chuckle to yourself today, Bronwyn. Sorry, yeah.
Can I just add in, Steve, sorry to interrupt, but I will make this point, and with all due respect to what Bronwyn is saying, the coalition were in power for 10 years. They did nothing about this. This is not a new problem. This isn't something that just suddenly popped up out of nowhere. What did the coalition government do about this activism in the ABC? What did they do to change it? Nothing happened, and they are complaining about it, as they do, but they're largely to blame because they didn't do anything to make changes there.
Sophie, I've got to say that I did I did raise exactly that point in the party room. I have done it myself. The fact that it wasn't taken up, I won't tell you where I think blame should lie, but I haven't come up with this as a new idea.
Oh, why not, Bronwyn? That would be so fun.
Yes, well, I just think it is the way
you two can talk off air and we'll get names exchanged. Don't worry about that. Bronwyn Bishop and Sophie Ellsworth, thank you very much for your time as usual. Good on you both, and we'll see you soon. After the break, the far-left Victorian Council that's boycotting companies with links to Israel. We'll have more details on that up next. Welcome back. Chris Kenny coming up at the top of the hour. Now, activist councils right around Australia have been acting disgracefully over the last 8 weeks around the conflict in the Middle East between Israel, Hamas in Gaza. Now, we learn overnight that Melbourne's Darebin Council has been accused of anti-Semitism after councillors unanimously, I stress that word unanimously, voted to boycott companies and suppliers with links to Israel. Now, the motion calls for the council to investigate how to end contracts with companies and suppliers that support what they claim is the illegal occupation of Palestine or profit from it, especially companies that supply equipment to Israel's Defence Force. Joining us to discuss this is Dr. Dubbo Abramovich, who chairs the Anti-Defamation Commission, Australia's leading civil rights organisation fighting anti-Semitism. Dr. Abramovich, great to have you with us. This is not the first council that's done this, but let's focus on Darebin. It was a unanimous vote. And what business is it of those councils to insert themselves in such an anti-Semitic way into this discussion?
Good to be with you, Steve. Look, it's clear that these councils, not just Darebin but others, have lost their moral centre if they ever had one, but have torn up the rule book about decency and fairness. And instead of being in the business of caring for residents and making sure that services are done on time, they're now gripped by this irrational obsession with demonizing, vilifying and criminalizing the only Jewish state in the world, and also investing in anti-Semitic campaigns such as the boycott, divestment and sanctions, which frankly belongs in Nazi Germany of 1933, not modern-day Australia. And just to tell your viewers how despicable this motion is, it doesn't even mention the word Hamas or October 7th. So if a Martian landed on Earth and read the motion, they wouldn't know that more than 1,200 Israelis were massacred by the homicidal maniacs of Hamas, including decapitated babies, the rape and murder of women, and the execution of entire families. This council has to hang its head in shame. This is a stain on local politics that will never be erased, and history will remember those who voted for this shameful, immoral resolution.
Dubbo, how do you feel when you drive past a council chamber and they've got the Palestinian flag flying there? No Star of David flag, no Israeli flag.
Well, this is a stab in the heart of every Israeli, every Jewish Australian. Given what has happened on October 7th, given the skyrocketing anti-Semitism that we've seen on the streets, the calls for the destruction of Israel, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, blaming the Jews, which is the oldest classic anti-Semitic myth, it worries me, it's disgusting, it's revolting, and all these councils are engaging in one of the worst anti-Semitic campaigns we've seen. And it's no wonder, Steve, that the Jewish community feels under siege. It feels betrayed. People that we thought were our friends and allies and supporters have walked away. And this is not the Melbourne that I love and remember.
Do you think the Jewish community is getting the support it should get from the Victorian state government or even the federal government?
I've been heartened by some of the declarations made by the Labor government here in Victoria and certainly the federal government. But the problem is that there are too many elected representatives who have chosen to remain silent. The deafening silence is very evident, but also this type of denialism, trying to contextualize what happened, the depravity and the barbarism of Hamas, all coming out and saying that this didn't start on October 7th. As I said, the Jewish community feels very alone and isolated, and we will remember those who did not stand shoulder to shoulder with us.
As you should. Dr. Dubbo Abramovich, it's always a pleasure to catch up with you. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. That's all from us tonight. Chris Kenny is up next.